Welcome to episode 39 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. On this edition of the podcast, we're going to talk about why Bryce Harper is not just important to the Phillies, but to baseball as a whole in 2019. Also, we'll touch on Jon Cryer's performance as Lex Luthor in Supergirl and the impact on the show, not just in terms of the quality of the show, but also fan reception. How Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov are disrespecting the UFC and MMA as a whole, and we'll wrap up with Captain Marvel setting more records at the box office. So let's open up a cold one and get started on episode 39 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Topic number one on this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast: Bryce Harper has exploded onto the scene for Philadelphia, and he's been a huge impact on the industry of baseball as a whole. And what I mean by the industry of baseball is this. When you look around at the jersey sales, he didn't just set records compared to other baseball players. He's breaking records across all sports. In multiple categories, Bryce Harper is a superstar in the game of baseball and has proven that through merchandise sales, through attention, and through television viewership. NBC Sports Philadelphia has had some of the highest viewership they've had of any sport in the last 5 to 8 years. So we know people are attracted to Bryce Harper. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's a box office attraction. It's the old school concept of why should people watch you versus somebody else? Well, they're drawn to you. They're drawn to your game. They're drawn to what you bring to the table. And part of being drawn to you is the fact that if you are a Phillies fan, Bryce Harper is a hero. And if you're the other team the Phillies are playing, Bryce Harper is the villain. The concept of heroes versus villains goes back to the ancient times of telling stories of Greek mythology, all the way up to the time of Shakespeare and the modern day. Every good story, whether it is deep or superficial, has heroes and villains, protagonists, antagonists. And Bryce Harper has really brought back for baseball the rooting interest for and against a specific player. And it's been hard to find heroes and villains in sports, the type that maybe people like myself or you, the listener, grew up with, because of the fact that athletes today just want to be liked. They don't have an interest in having anybody upset with them or mad with them. You know, sometimes you might want to call them soft. Some athletes are just hypersensitive. Some of them are just betas who they just want to go out there and play their sport, and they don't want to be bothered with the particulars of the competitive edge that the fan base desires from them. You know, you look at a guy like Kevin Durant. This is a guy who left the Thunder and went to the Warriors to win a championship instead of trying to win it and beat the Warriors at their own game. He's the same guy who created Twitter troll accounts to attack people who said bad things about him. He's a dude who is not what we traditionally look at as a superstar player. Durant's very popular, but he doesn't handle the role of hero and villain very well. And in many ways, he doesn't fit either role. He's just a guy that a lot of people are either don't like or they might be indifferent about, or they could just do without him. You look at a guy like LeBron. He didn't like being the villain in Miami, but the sport of the NBA was better for it, because when the NBA was coming out of their lockout and their financial struggles leading up to the 2011 season, it was LeBron being in Miami became a focal point for teams around the league. Everyone was trying to find a way to beat the juggernaut, which was the Miami Heat. And in a similar way that when Magic came to the Lakers and Bird came to the Celtics heading into the 1980s, sports have always thrived with heroes and villains. And it's not just the same type of, well, the guy plays for your team and a guy plays for another team. The protagonist and antagonist of any storyline doesn't have to have particular sides in terms of if your team is involved. It could just be Reggie Miller versus the Knicks. And if you were someone who didn't like the Knicks for whatever reason, you rooted for Reggie. If you looked at Reggie's antics as, you know, too brash and ridiculous, you rooted against Reggie and rooted for the Knicks. In the 1990s, it was one of those deals where you picked sides. And in human nature, it is inherent, whether it is purposeful or subliminal. We choose sides in every situation. When you go out and hang out with your friends, you choose a specific seat at the bar. You choose to hang out with certain people. You choose to park in a certain place in the parking lot. You choose to hang your coat around the chair a certain way. Everything you do, whether conscious or subconscious, is a choice for or against something. And the same thing happens with heroes and villains. And for sports, when you don't have a rooting interest, you lose interest in the sport itself. And Bryce Harper is exactly what baseball needs. He gives you a reason to watch, whether you like him or dislike him, whether you're a Phillies fan, a Yankees fan, a Mets fan, whatever fan base you are supportive of, you look at Bryce Harper and you're either rooting for him or against him. And it causes more interest. It generates more attention from audiences who may not be as interested in baseball this time of year. And now you're seeing that the television ratings are reflecting this, the merchandise sales are reflecting this, ticket sales are reflecting this. People want to see Harper either succeed or fail. In a similar vein, people had this attitude over a decade ago about Barry Bonds. When Barry Bonds was breaking the home run records, you either loved Barry, you thought, yeah, good for you, Barry, go break these records, or you were like, oh, Barry's tainted, he's obviously on PEDs, this guy, I don't want him to break any records, he's a bad guy. But you were watching, you were interested, because you had a vested interest in what was happening. And Harper's going to do the same thing for baseball. Look, Aaron Judge may be popular, but people are more so either pro or anti-Yankees than they were pro or anti-Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge never has said or done anything to make you like or dislike him per se. He's a pretty likable young man. He's not someone who you're really going to have a strong feeling about. You look at Mike Trout. Mike Trout is one of the nicest human beings in all of baseball. He cares about the fans. He cares about his teammates. He's the most popular player in the game. No one's ever rooting against him. Baseball needs a villain. And what is Harper doing? He's catering to the Philly crowd. He's bowing in left field. He's coming out of the dugout after a home run, screaming at the crowd, let's go, pumping his fist. He is the ultimate version of the player you want on your team, but you hate on the other team. And Philadelphia had a similar infusion when it came to baseball about 40 years ago when Pete Rose came to the Phillies. Charlie Hustle, aggressive, thorn in the side. He re-energized the entire ball club, and a couple of years later, they go on to win the World Series. I'm not predicting right now a World Series win for the Phillies, but what I am predicting is that Harper on the Phillies is going to generate more interest in the game of baseball and in rooting for or against players than we've seen in a while. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that players are always so worried about what people think of them, and they don't want to be confrontational. They don't want to be adversarial. Bryce Harper doesn't care. And I love it. I think this is exactly what baseball needs. Baseball needs a protagonist and an antagonist on a night-to-night basis. Fans need a reason why to turn on the television, and Bryce Harper is giving you that reason. Topic number 2 on episode 39 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Jon Cryer recently made his debut as Lex Luthor on the CW show Supergirl, and it has infused new life and new interest into a show that frankly has been being propped up by the rest of the shows on the CW. You see, Supergirl, and as you've heard me discuss here on the Mutant Blitz Podcast, is a show that has drifted very far away from its original intent. When it was first debuted on CBS, the idea was this was a superhero show for women, about women, and was supposed to be something that was created to give women a superhero show and an action show of their own. Well, the show has drifted very far away from the original intent because at times the show has become preachy, the storytelling has gotten very weak, and in seasons 2 and 3, the show took some major hits in terms of ratings and audience response. As a result, the CW thought, well, we're going to move the show to Sunday nights. It'll be the lead-in for the new reboot of the show Charmed, and we'll have basically a women's night of programming in terms of all major role characters played by females, and they were hoping to draw in an audience that traditionally on Sunday night during football season, men are watching football, gives women something else to watch. The show on the onset struggled a little bit, got a major boost from the Elseworlds crossover in terms of interest, but again has waned in viewership and interest recently until Jon Cryer's debut as Lex Luthor. And I was at first very skeptical about Jon Cryer playing this role because in the past, Jon Cryer's roles over the years were never ones that ever made you think this guy could portray a super villain. This guy could have the on-screen presence to play this kind of role. It's not like when James Spader was cast to voice the supervillain Ultron in the second Avengers movie, where you're like, okay, James Spader has a history of being this great actor and owning a role, and he has a certain presence and a certain voice and a certain personality that would make sense. You never looked at a guy like Jon Cryer and thought that. So when he was cast for this role, fairly I was skeptical, but I was also skeptical because of the fact that historically Lex Luthor's portrayal on the small and big screen has been something of controversy. While Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor was very popular for moviegoers when the Christopher Reeve movies came out of Superman years ago, for comic book fans, Gene Hackman's portrayal was really lacking a lot of juice because of the fact that in the comics, the character of Lex Luthor was of a higher intellectual level, much more devious, much more a mental mogul than he was just a rich person. In some ways, Gene Hackman's character, he was devious and he was a great mastermind, but he wasn't at the same level as the comic books were. He lacked the devious and borderline psychotically deviant traits of the Lex Luthor from the comics. Years later, when we were introduced to Michael Rosenbaum's portrayal of Lex Luthor on Smallville, it was a Lex Luthor very early in his career as what we've become to know as Lex Luthor from the comics and from the animated TV series, which kind of gave us some new perspective on Lex Luthor and Superman in the 90s and early 2000s. And Smallville introduced us to a Lex Luthor who was evolving from his early 20s into his early 30s over the 10 seasons that Smallville was on television. And Michael Rosenbaum was very well received, not just because of the fact that he looked like a younger Lex Luthor, but also because of the fact that Michael Rosenbaum does a great job at embodying the yin and the yang of Lex Luthor, a guy who's complicated, a guy who really truly believes he's in the right, an individual who truly believes that he has all the answers and he can solve all the world's problems and that he can save the world from any problem and he has all the answers and solutions. And you see the evolution with Rosenbaum's character portrayal of Lex Luthor from, maybe a more of an idealist and an ideologue to an individual who is at the level of devious intellect and basically a mental mogul and power broker that is unrivaled in all of DC. While Kevin Spacey did a good job with the character in Superman Returns, the movie was so poor overall, and everything that went along with the movie was so just pathetic that his portrayal of the character kind of gotten forgotten and realistically probably should be forgotten because that movie was so poorly executed. Years later, Jesse Eisenberg did a good job with Lex Luthor, but I was always curious where he really fit into the mythos because Lex Luthor was always so closely attached to Superman in storytelling and the mythology of Superman over the years that for him just to show up when he did and how he did really left a lot of people scratching their head wondering what was the point of Lex Luthor even in the Batman v Superman movie. Jon Cryer's portrayal of Lex Luthor, in my opinion, has been genius. It's an older Lex Luthor, so we've seen Michael Rosenbaum play a younger one. We've seen Gene Hackman play Lex Luthor more of the middle of his career, and now we're seeing Jon Cryer play an older Lex Luthor, a more experienced, a more veteran Lex Luthor, a more networked than ever Lex Luthor. We're seeing the devious nature of him. We're seeing the intellect. We're seeing the strategy. We're seeing the manipulation of everybody he touches and talks to. And Cryer is doing an excellent job at stealing the show. As a viewer, you're almost watching to see Lex Luthor than you are seeing Supergirl. You almost don't care about Supergirl at certain parts of these episodes. You're so invested now. What is Lex Luthor going to do next? What is his next move? Because you find out that he's behind all these different things that have been going on in Supergirl's life. Constantly has something up his sleeve. And Cryer is just killing it with the role. And you're seeing that from audience reaction. The episodes that Lex Luthor has been on, House of L, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, are not just some of the highest rated episodes of Supergirl in terms of viewership, but they're some of the highest rated episodes for Supergirl in terms of viewership, television ratings, and digital response since season 3, midway through the season, with their Crisis on Earth X crossover event. In fact, if you take out the crossover events, Supergirl hasn't had this high of a rating when it came to audience attention since season 1. So this has been a huge hit. And even though there are still rumors that Supergirl could be canceled and there may not be a season 5, I think that Jon Cryer shows you what good writing and good directing and great acting can do, which is it changes the dynamic of a show. And it's a shame that it took Supergirl this long to figure it out. Because look, for the last couple seasons, they've been preachy at times. They've been way too emotionally invested in the relationships of the characters instead of the evolution and the development of the characters. In some ways, their obsession over these relationships has actually stunted the development of these characters on the screen. And then the crossover events basically prop up all the shows, give them all a bit of a ratings boost for a while, and I'll keep them going. But Supergirl has been dragging behind. In fact, until recently, Supergirl has had a lot of trouble cracking the 1 million viewer mark each week. It wasn't until Jon Cryer stepped in as Lex Luthor they finally were able to cross that million viewer mark from a week-to-week basis. They haven't done that in almost 2 years. And again, outside the crossover events, Supergirl has really struggled in terms of viewership, in terms of audience attention, and in terms of audience interest. And I'm not saying they have to keep the show. I'm not saying they shouldn't cancel it. But what I am saying is, if they can find a way to keep Lex Luthor's role and character relevant in the Arrowverse that the CW has, when you move forward to a potential Supergirl season 5, there is a strong possibility that you can save the show if Lex Luthor becomes much more of a role. Now, there have been rumors reported by different outlets online that the CW is going to use Lex Luthor to wrap up the Supergirl storyline and then reintroduce Tyler Hoechlin's portrayal of Superman / Clark Kent, and there would be a Man of Steel CW show. I'm not 100% bought into that because of the fact that I think that there is still a place for Supergirl in the big picture of the CW television universe. I don't think the character is totally lost. I don't think the character is totally void of value. But as we've seen with the portrayal of Brie Larson as Carol Danvers / Captain Marvel, as we've seen from Wonder Woman on the television screen, and we've seen from Chloe Bennett's portrayal of Daisy Johnson, also known as Quake, in the television show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., you could have a strong female character, but you have to do it with substance. Like anything, you have to give the audience a reason to keep watching. And just because Melissa Benoist has done a great job with the character, it's just not good enough sometimes. People want more from their shows. They want more storytelling. They want more substance. They want more quality of content. And at times, Supergirl has lost their way. Maybe with Lex Luthor in the show, it can save it. I'm not 100% sure, but we know from viewership and in terms of audience interest, Jon Cryer's been a hit, and I think he's been incredible in the role. And I would argue he may be the best portrayal of Lex Luthor we've ever seen on the big or small screen. Topic number 3 on this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. The Conor McGregor-Khabib Nurmagomedov feud, which has been going on for basically 2 years now, hit another apex of ridiculousness recently when Conor McGregor went out of his way to basically be disparaging toward Khabib's religion and Khabib's wife. And as you've heard me discuss here on the podcast before, the fact that Conor McGregor comes from an Irish Catholic background and that Khabib Nurmagomedov is a Muslim from Dagestan, you have people who come from two different worlds, two different situations, and two different cultures, and they look at the world totally differently, and they resent each other. They've always resented each other. They look at each other as the antithesis of what they think is, respectable. And McGregor is going out of his way to basically be a jerk, and Khabib has gone out of his way to basically show himself to be thin-skinned and unable to stay professional at times. And this is the problem with these two fighters, and that is you have two men who have been the 155-pound champion, and they have put the entire division in disarray. So you see, historically, UFC champions have been ambassadors for mixed martial arts. They've been ambassadors for the UFC. They're the guys who do all the interviews. They're the guys who do all the public relations. They show up at events. They put themselves out there as, this is what our sport is. This is who our organization is. This is why you should watch us. And while there has been trash talking over the years, it's never been on a level that suggested that it was just totally disrespectful and unprofessional to the sport. McGregor and Khabib have been so negligent to the sport and respecting the sport. They don't care what's best for mixed martial arts. They don't care what's best for the UFC. They only care about their feuds and themselves. And they've done a horrible job at representing themselves professionally in the public space. And they've thrown an entire division in disarray to the point where now, a couple weeks from now, you're going to have Max Holloway, the featherweight champion of the UFC, move up to 155 to fight Dustin Poirier, who is the number 3 ranked fighter, because McGregor can't keep himself out of trouble inside and outside the octagon. Khabib Nurmagomedov is still suspended, and there's no guarantee who he's going to fight next. Tony Ferguson is still coming off an injury. The entire division has been put on hold because two guys can't keep their emotions in check. It's unprofessional, and it's that you have two individuals who can't just grow up. Okay? I don't have time for Khabib being thin-skinned. I don't care what he says about your wife. I don't care what he says about your religion. I don't care what he says about your home country. If you consider yourself such a man of high moral character, if you consider yourself having high moral character and high moral standards, then act like it. You got to walk your talk. You have to be above him. And he hasn't done that. Khabib has lowered himself numerous times to McGregor's trash talking. McGregor has shown himself to not be a family man, retiring for the second time in the last few years, and then saying a couple of weeks later that he'll see Khabib next inside the octagon, threatening to go back to boxing again. It's all a bargaining ploy. It's all manipulation of the audience and the media and of the UFC. And Dana White has every right to be so over all this, because Dana White now has a wonderful relationship with a media partner in ESPN that is interested in promoting him as much as he is in promoting his sport. He finally has a partner who actually is invested in the UFC. And now he has two fighters who are some of the biggest names in the sport who can't live their lives in a professional manner that is expected of a champion. Mixed martial arts is a sport that in many ways is based on respect. It is a sport that is based on training and skill and perfecting yourself, not just as a fighter, but as a human being. Martial arts is more than just a way to fight somebody. It's a way for you to have balance and learn to control your emotions and your actions. And neither McGregor or Khabib have been very good at controlling themselves on social media or in public arenas. And now with McGregor being accused of rape in Ireland, which is an ongoing investigation, you have Khabib, who is still suspended by the Nevada Athletic Commission for his actions that were totally disrespectful and uncalled for after the McGregor fight of him and his camp. You now have a situation where the entire division is put on hold at 155 because you have two guys who can't get over themselves. I hope at some point we can move beyond this petulant feud, but for now, You have two fighters who care more about themselves than they do about anybody and anything else. UFC fans deserve better. The MMA community deserves better than these two imbeciles representing the sport to the masses, to the casual fan who frankly may not know better. You never saw BJ Penn act like this. You never saw George St. Pierre act like this. You never saw any other of these champions who have been in these weight classes act the way McGregor and Khabib have. It's disrespectful, it's unprofessional, and frankly, it's negligent of their responsibilities to the sport and to their fans. You are making millions of dollars. Grow up. Topic number 4 on episode 39 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. As of April 3rd, the movie Captain Marvel has passed the 1 billion mark worldwide. Yes, that's right. Captain Marvel is still making lots and lots of money for the Marvel Studios and their producers and their parent company, Disney. And now Captain Marvel is going to be moving into potentially the top 5 list of the highest grossing Marvel movies of all time. For those who don't know, the number one movie is Avengers Infinity War. It crossed the 2 billion mark when it was in theaters. The first Avengers movie was 1.5 billion. Avengers Age of Ultron was 1.4 billion. Then Black Panther was the first non-Avengers movie to make major money recently, crossing the 1.3 billion mark. Iron Man 3 was 1.2 billion. And Captain America Civil War was 1.1 billion. Captain Marvel will probably be passing Captain America Civil War very soon. It's always a shot at passing Iron Man 3. It's going to be hard to pass Iron Man 3 just because with Endgame coming up very soon, there's going to be a shifting of interest to that movie. Well, Captain Marvel, in many ways, has done exactly what the Marvel Cinematic Universe wanted. You introduce a character that is totally different than anybody else, a character that can help carry you into the next phase, the post-Avengers phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in a world where there's a potential that we have no more Tony Stark Iron Man, we have no more Steve Rogers Captain America. In a world where these things could happen, Captain Marvel has to be one of the stars. You look at Captain Marvel and Black Panther's excellent reception by audiences and by the casual viewer as well. It shows that Marvel's in a very healthy place, and now as they get back characters like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, they have a lot of tools to play with in the tool shed moving forward. And I remember I ran into somebody recently who told me that they didn't like Captain Marvel. And I asked them why, and they said, oh, well, she's too powerful. And it just feels like such a cop-out because the reality is that Captain Marvel is supposed to be a powerful character. Captain Marvel was always supposed to be a character that was the most powerful character, as Kevin Feige said, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You've never seen a hero like this before, and it was purposefully done this way. And that's something that we overlook, and that's the fact that Marvel is setting up, after Avengers Endgame, a universe that's going to be pretty much different than what we've seen over the last 10 years. Previously, the power arms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe were people like Thor and Hulk, and there was always a way to defeat the enemy. Well, this is the first time the Avengers have lost in Avengers Infinity War, and now you have to set up a whole new world once this massive showdown happens. And if you're going to be bringing in the Fantastic Four, and you could potentially bring in a villain like Doctor Doom, who I know Marvel will get that right, unlike the Fox Studios. When you bring in the X-Men and the potential of a villain that we've never seen in the X-Men movies for as long as Fox has had him, which is Mr. Sinister, you can do a lot of things with a villain like that. Marvel needs to set a groundwork and maybe even a ceiling for how powerful a character can be. And if in 5-10 years, Marvel wants to experiment or try out Jean Grey and the Phoenix Force, or they want to have Galactus come to Earth, or they want to introduce Franklin Richards, who is the son of Sue and Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, a character who is so ridiculously powerful that he can create universes and manipulate all of reality if he focuses hard enough. You have to set the groundwork for a powerful character. So Captain Marvel was more than just a movie about a strong female character. It was also introducing concepts and elements to the Marvel Cinematic Universe that we've never seen before. And it also gives us background moving forward for Nick Fury's history, Phil Coulson's history. And you can play around with that moving forward, as Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury is going to have a major role in the upcoming Spider-Man Far From Home movie. It's no longer going to be Tony Stark watching over Spider-Man's shoulder. It's going to be Nick Fury, just like he does in the comics at times, keeping an eye out on Spider-Man and helping him as he matures and becomes all that he can be as a superhero. So you got to give Nick Fury a larger role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, historically more so than just the Iron Man movies and what's been suggested to us in different movies and television shows. I don't know exactly how long Captain Marvel's going to have. I'm going to assume that Marvel seems to be pretty set on Captain Marvel and Black Panther having major roles in the MCU moving forward. So I'm going to assume that we're going to see, after Avengers Endgame, at least one more Captain Marvel movie. We'll see her appear either in a new Avengers type movie with a new cast of characters serving as Avengers, or they may rename the team Defenders. Who knows? We know in the comics that Doctor Strange and the Hulk are a part of a group of heroes called the Defenders originally, before the modern version of the Defenders that we saw on Netflix. We could go with that. We could also go with a situation where Captain Marvel starts SWORD, which is a aerospace interdimensional version of S.H.I.E.L.D., which would allow her to still be in touch with Earth, but spend most of her time in space and outside of Earth's orbit, instead of just dealing with Earth issues and leave maybe the Earth issues to people like Spider-Man and Black Panther. There's a lot of ways Marvel can go with it, but you can't go in those directions. You can't have that expansion of your universe. You can't explain the history behind certain things without a character like Captain Marvel to be the catalyst. And for her to already cross the billion mark, as we are just a few weeks away from Avengers Endgame, tells you how important these movies and these characters are for the overall big picture, what Marvel's going to do. And it's very exciting. It's fascinating to watch the evolution of the storytelling, because it shows you that Marvel is very serious about growth. They're not just going to keep running out their Iron Man and Captain America and Thor every time. They want to grow the universe beyond that. And let's be realistic. Historically, Iron Man was never the most popular comic book character. Captain America and Spider-Man were always more popular than Iron Man, but they made a B or C list level character one of the most popular characters in all the movies with Robert Downey Jr. They took a character in Thor who, frankly, his history in the comics was very confusing, and there were multiple people who portrayed Thor over the years in different iterations and different explanations for who Thor is, and they condensed it, they cleaned it up, and they gave you a proper origin story for Thor. You don't think they could do the same thing for the Fantastic Four and the X-Men? It's going to be fascinating to watch how Captain Marvel works in with all of that, and the fact that audiences have already pushed her over the billion mark internationally tells you that audiences are ready for this next phase after Avengers Endgame. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this week's podcast topics, you can drop in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this podcast, hit that like button and subscribe so you catch each episode of the podcast. I'm Josh Hennig, your host, and in each episode I give you my perspective on some of the biggest topics and stories around the sports and TV and comic book universe. I'll catch you next time right here for the Mutant Blitz Podcast.